Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first episode of the Rock Debate Club. My co-host Bill Puig from Legion of Prague. We were doing vinyl siding. We kind of converted things around this year a little bit. We're going to be taking those topics that we all talk about in the world of rock, and we're going to debate them. A lot of good stuff. Our first show tonight, Van Halen versus Van Hagar. What are you thinking, Bill?
Well, I think it's going to make for a lot of interesting conversation because people who know the history of Van Halen almost always have not just an opinion, but a strong opinion of whether Dave or Sammy was the right guy for the band. Where I sit, I think they were each the right guy for the band at the time they were there.
I agree with you.
To a certain degree, by the time 1984, 1985 came, some of the chinks in the armor were beginning to appear, and the relationship between Eddie Van Halen and David Lee Roth was beginning to get a little bit frayed. And there were factors behind the scenes too, I think, that were also driving the decision for the band to try and move ahead without David. Eddie, of course, had married Valerie Bertinelli back then. I don't think she was ever a Dave fan. Dave, despite the fact that the guys were getting into their 30s back in 84, 85, still, I think, wanted the band to, at its heart, be a party band. And I think Eddie had other aspirations to try and show that they were a bit more serious. And in that regard, I think Sammy was a very good choice to move forward, where he was serious enough to show that the band could be serious, but he was a fun guy too when things called for it. So overall, I think we had one band that had two very good incarnations of it.
Yeah, I agree. So, guys, to do the Rock Debate Club, we bring on different guests. And tonight I'm very excited to bring from Romeo's Delight, Michael, Buddy, and Joby. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being on with us tonight.
Absolutely.
Man, yeah. And from Van Hagar is our friend Bill. Hey, Bill. Let me unmute. I got Bill muted. Sorry, Bill.
No problem.
Looks like I got Mike. There we go. So we were talking a little bit, intro in the show, the difference between David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar. And for our viewers, you're not looking for some like Celebrity Fight Club thing where we're just debating, talking about it. No heated arguments, no fighting. But guys, like, here's the thing, and I got to throw this out to Bill, Joby, and Michael right off the bat. So while there was a change in the front man from from David Lee Roth to Sammy Hagar, the one thing that stayed consistent for the most part was the music, the band behind the singer. Did you guys see a big difference from one front man to the other as far as the musicianship was concerned?
Absolutely 100% yes. As being a diehard Dave fan that I am, and got hooked and totally addicted to it when I was a kid growing up, you saw Sammy bring a different level of musicianship to the band, because there was like a weight lifted off their shoulders and the book was thrown wide open. There was nothing or no one to hold them back.
All right. What do you think, Bill?
It's weird for me, and I guess I'm such an Eddie freak that, I loved both eras. The David Lee Roth era they changed everything when they started with Dave. He was a very big part in everything they did. And like Andy said, Andy, right? They said the right name? Joby, I'm sorry. My eyes are bad and I'm seeing the name and it looked like Andy.
No, I just happen to be wearing my Michael Anthony shirt.
Oh, there you go.
I just got done working out. Sorry, guys. So it's nice to see you again, Will.
Yes. with Sammy, like you said, it was a breath of fresh air for the band. They were really going down a bad path with Dave. Like you said, he wanted to stay the party, the party angle, and they were maturing, and it's yeah. You also think about it. Do you really think Dave in the late '80s into the '90s? I mean, he did a couple of tours after that was great, but going into the '90s, do you think he would have been the right frontman for that? Staying with Dave, dressed up, jumping around like a circus man, I think they would have went downhill real fast, in my opinion. What he did from '78 to '84, you can't dispute any of that. That stuff is just amazing stuff. Everything about it is great, but his whole antic, I think, come 1990, people would have really started getting tired. I think he would have left. They would have threw him out if he would have stayed. I got to be honest, only because of his antics.
Right.
I think
Any of you guys can feel free to jump in at
I
any
think that
time.
in the '90s, I think it was like the staple of the nail in the coffin that put everything down. I think as far as of course the grunge thing that changed it all, but even when Sammy was in there, who I of course love Sammy, but even they went down. I mean, opening for Bon Jovi, opening the MTV Music Awards instead of being a headliner. Van Halen dropped down. Just not because of Sammy, just because of the '90s. And I think if Dave were there, I don't know. It's hard to say, but it was such a different time. I mean, Dave would have had to change, I think, just to kind of fit in,
100%.
Well, you look too at the quality of what Dave was producing in the early '90s. I mean, his first two albums as a solo artist are, at least in my opinion, really good albums. I think they would have held their own as Van Halen albums.
Yeah.
But when you got to A Little Ain't Enough and Your Dirty Mouth, I mean, he was not putting out quality product.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I saw in 90, it must have been 94, 95, maybe it was 97. One of those years, I saw Van Halen in a hall, in a Coliseum with Sammy. And then I went to see David Lee Roth at a bar. I was so upset about that. Like, I was watching David Lee Roth on stage with a bunch of kids playing behind him, and I was like, my God, if Van Halen was behind him, this would be the greatest show I've ever seen.
Right.
But he was at a bar, and I'm like, this isn't good, man. This is bad.
I think this just having the name Van Halen is a huge part. That is the brand. That's the product that's really going to elevate things. And that was the name on Van Halen 1, on the first album in 1984, those big albums. So had not having that name behind them too. I think everything's a factor, but I think that could have been another factor also.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was back again, Eddie's idea, or not Eddie's idea. That was David's idea.
Yeah, that was Dave.
Man,
yeah.
So Mike, you've been quiet. Wanted to add anything to the conversation?
Just listening, man. I mean, talking about the change of music, I think it really definitely all had to do with the change of singers too, with their writing. Musicianship, of course, never changed because between Eddie, Alex, and Michael, I mean, they're just that didn't change, but you could definitely tell the writing changed, and it was a totally different audience at the time. Once Sammy got in, I mean, again, love Sammy, great singer. My gosh, what a rock and roll voice. But when Sammy got in, it almost, after the first album, it almost seemed like they went more college kids started to really follow them. I don't know if it was because of the music, because of the timing, could have been a couple different things. But it kind of wasn't the same crowd as the Roth crowd when they first came out.
I remember reading a quote somewhere that was something like, when David fronted the band, it was like the party time, and then when Sammy fronted the band, it was like driving the minivan type year.
Okay, yeah, exactly.
So like one's your dad's kind of rock, and one was the party type of rock. It's almost like the band grew up.
Could have, yeah.
Agree with that.
I mean, the one thing that I could tell difference musically, is with Sammy. They were much more synth driven, I think.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and that was one of the things that I know Dave was absolutely against. I mean, he
Right.
thought that part of the Van Halen brand was
It's-
Eddie's guitar, period.
It's
Sure.
like if you go back and listen to Dave's first album, solo album, there's keyboards all over it.
Oh yeah.
You know, so he was like contradicting himself, you know, because he wanted to, the guitar driven thing, but when he got out, it was, wait a minute, there's keys all over Dave's stuff.
Well, I think that had a lot to do with Jump. I think
There you go.
he just saw what that turned out to be, and he was just like, "That got to put that in there."
For sure. Definitely.
You know,
Yeah, it's kind of like he submitted to, what was changing and brought it into, his own show. It's like, oh, all right, yeah, guess we got to, use this to, to keep me up there and keep me relevant type of thing.
Well, to a certain degree too. I think he knew how to go after good musicians to create what he wanted to create. On the EP, for example, he did the cover of Edgar Winter's song "Easy Street." He brought in Edgar Winter to play the keys on it.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there was now we used to do a show called Vinyl Siding where we would compare the two albums. So we're gonna do our kind of vinyl siding here, just roughly talking about Van Halen 2, which was David Lee Roth's sophomore attack, and then you had OU812, which would have been Sammy's sophomore attack with Van Halen. And any as far as Van Halen 2, what made that album superior or sub-superior to you guys?
anybody want to talk?
You go.
Let somebody else talk.
For me, I got introduced to Van Halen from Van Halen 2. So that was my first dive into it. A good friend of mine growing up, his older brother, we're sitting around literally sitting around the dining room table. He comes home from visiting his dad and says, "Hey, you guys got to listen to this band." And for what started it for me, the opening track and hearing the bass start off an album was like unprecedented. You never heard a bass start off an album. It was usually a guitar, some kind of keys or piano, but never that was I was totally awestruck by that. And then it was just, for me, it was song after song was so good, and we must have listened to that album 4 or 5 times that night, sitting around doing homework. And that's my first staple into it, and I was hooked, dead on from that day. And I went out, bought I saved up my newspaper money and put Van Halen 1 on 8-track so I could listen to it in my parents' car. That now I'm really dating myself. But yeah, that was the sparked my interest in that band, in this band, and to where it's led me today, of picking up the bass guitar and really digging into it and finding out what Mike plays. The vocals were just unprecedented. It's like the Eagles with their harmonies. It was the standard that everybody was basing themselves off of, because they started this whole new thing of not only were we badass partiers, but the level of musicianship, and the bar got raised exponentially for me.
What do you
Yeah,
think,
I
Buddy?
agree,
Van
Joe.
Halen
It's
2?
hard to talk about Van Halen 2 without talking about Van Halen 1 first. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, because that record changed so much.
Yeah.
And as you said, The sound of the bass was terrific, as well as Eddie's guitar. My story is a little bit similar to yours about Van Halen 1. I'm a little bit older than you are, but the first ever brand new car I owned was being driven home from the showroom that day.
Nice.
When I heard "You Really Got Me" on the radio for the first time. And I remember my jaw dropping open as I'm driving over the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. I lived in Brooklyn at the time. I was like, what the hell am I listening to? My God. But listening to the quality of the guitar work, the sound of the bass, forget what Michael was playing. The sound was awesome. It was huge.
And you heard it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you did. And one of the reasons why, as I came to learn much later, Ted Templeman, who was their producer, he produced the Doobie Brothers earlier. He was a musician in his own right. He was a recording musician and made like 4 or 5 albums back in the 60s. So he knew what he was doing. So you took that quality of musicianship with someone who knew the studio as well as he did, and then the vocals. Dave's vocals were great. Michael's high harmonies were phenomenal, still are.
Art.
Yeah.
So I was, as far as Van Halen 2 was concerned, I was waiting with bated breath for that one. I didn't know necessarily that it was going to be as good as Van Halen 1, but I knew it was going to be worth listening to.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was really cool that when they went back and they got off tour, as soon as they went, they had to put a new product out right away. And as we all know, they had a lot of those songs left over from the demos from the first album.
Right.
We all know that. But the thing that is really amazing as far as putting it together and putting it out with the help of, Ted Templeman, of course, is that it only took 2 weeks before it was done because they had so much of it together. But in those 2 weeks to put out something that has lasted the test of time like that is really amazing. So you can go on and on about it. How about you, Bill? What do you?
Well, Michael, you want to say something? He's been sitting up there. I want him to...
Michael, we need you, Michael. We need you at the front.
I'm good, man. You're good. Go ahead, Bill.
Van Halen 2. Look, like I told you, I'm a fan of. I'm an Eddie fan, so I like everything he's ever put out. Van Halen 3, I mean, it was just a bad thing at that time. He wasn't in his right place. There's a couple of good songs on it, but I'm not a huge fan of it. But Van Halen 2 to me, it's an extension of Van Halen 1, in my opinion. They tried to keep the same similar formula. Instead of doing an electric eruption, they added Spanish Fly. They had a lot of the songs, like Buddy said, from the demos that they had. You can even go back to the Gene Simmons demos. Some of those songs are from, and they were different names and everything. But, Ted Templeman came in, made those songs what they were, made it Van Halen, with those guys. And it's a great album, man. You're right. It stands the test of time. Both of those, the first 2 albums, those were the real party years. I feel like it wasn't until Women and Children First that really Eddie started experimenting with different things.
Yep.
Those first 2 albums were, this is the band, we're going live, and that's it. And I know we're comparing that to OU 812, but I think you're going to have to wait for that because that's a whole other animal to talk about. You can't even put those 2 albums next to each other because it's completely different, in my opinion.
To me, it is completely different. I think a couple things that I took away, and I had never listened to, and preparing for this show, I did those 2 albums back to back. And there are parts of OU 812 where I feel that Sammy is kind of mimicking David a little bit in some of the gasps and stuff that he does, and some of the high notes and some of the things that he patterned on that album, I felt was a little copy of David. Any thoughts on that?
I agree with you, actually. I read in a bunch of interviews that Sammy is, when he listens to that album, he some of it he's not too happy with, that he wish he didn't do. And they did on some of those songs, they tried to get the old school vibe back, and I don't know if it really hit. The hits on that album are what really made that album great, in my opinion. The backup, the filler songs like Source of Infection and Sucker in a 3-piece. Although I do like those songs, those are the songs that remind you of like what David Lee Roth would have done on those songs.
Right.
And it probably would have been better than what he did. A lot of the lyrics were a little cheesy on that album, but then you look at the hits, and I love the hits. I love Finish What You Started. It was so different for them. You know, it was wow. How did they come? How the hell did this guy come up with like a country picks, finger picking type of thing? And
over a Latin beat.
Yeah. It was just awesome. I thought it was awesome. I know some people didn't like it. I liked it. I grew up. See, I'm the younger one here, guys. I'm only 45. The first time I saw Van Halen was '91 with Sammy, so that like changed my life. When I was real young and I heard Hot for Teacher, I didn't even realize there were two different singers at that time. You know, in '84, I was friggin' 7 years old, 8 years old. I didn't know what was going on. You know.
Well, that being said, I'm gonna bring up the comment of somebody watching it. To be fair, there should have been an age-appropriate panelist to support and be a pro-Sammy era guest. That being said, David Lee Roth is Van Halen. Any thoughts to that comment, gents?
To each his own. There you go. That's all you could say.
Yeah, I mean, and it all depends on, I guess, the age group that you like the comment, the age group you talk to. You know what I mean? Us older guys, us old timers, old dudes, Van Halen to us is David Lee. As much as Sammy's a phenom, again, Van Halen is David Lee. Sorry, Bill, but you being the young guy, I get it. Us older guys, man, we grew up with the David Lee era, I guess say. So
I do have a question to ask everybody else. And for you two guys who, supposedly the rumor back in 1980 was that Eddie and Alex had already were displeased with Dave and his antics, and that the higher ups in Warner Brothers had back then proposed that they get rid of Dave and bring Sammy aboard.
That was actually before the first album, bro.
Even before that?
Yep. That happened before they even made the first album. It was right around the time when Ted Templeman finally took interest in them, after the Gene Simmons, Bob Ezrin thing fell apart, when Kiss was trying to get them signed. Ted Templeman took them on, and he was just like, I don't think you guys are going to do it with this guy, David Lee Roth. I don't think he's that good of a singer. I got this guy, Sammy Hagar, who's in Montrose, that would be perfect for you guys. And ultimately, they passed up on that, and thank God that they did. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had those classic albums.
True, 100%, Bill. I agree with it.
And Ted Templeman, and I happen to have read his book, he actually said that, when he wanted to get Sammy in the band, he said if he didn't get David Lee Roth because of his, the different lyrics that he wrote were so off the wall, and nothing like that had ever been written and recorded before. Ted Templeman also stated that if he didn't get Roth in the band, it would have been a mistake for the whole band in itself. So that's kind of interesting,
Yeah.
Not that Sammy didn't do great afterwards, because of course he did, but
Yeah, you could always say, what if?
I think at the time period that Van Halen was coming out, I don't think at that stage in Sammy Hagar's career, if he would have made a big success out of that. I mean, I can't picture no one else but David Lee Roth in those early days doing what needed to be done for Van Halen. I was watching the documentary, and they said that it was almost like somebody replicated a band to represent California. Like they were complete California. Yep. And like anything you think of or look at or think of as far as California is concerned were exampled in that band.
Yeah, like the two things, the two bands in California that sold out the Civic Center were the Beach Boys and Van Halen. They were the only two to do it without any kind of management, any kind of push behind them. And that is, so like what you're saying, I think, David Lee Roth needed to be there. All those people that filled up the Civic Center in 1976 were not wrong, No. Yeah.
Now, I wanted to mention something earlier, and I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up Van Halen 3 at all. We touched on it very briefly, but I think after listening to Van Halen 2, OU812, and then going into that album, I felt like even Gary was kind of pulling from both of them and trying to represent both sides in like one guy. I don't think he really had his own kind of personality to it. I could be wrong.
I hear what you're saying with that. Definitely see that.
I agree with that because Gary has Sammy's vocal range. But if you go back and watch Extreme, some of the early stuff, yeah, David Lee Roth was the blueprint of being the frontman for the band.
Yeah.
And for me, when I saw that tour a couple of times and got to watch them, and I actually kind of wish they gave Gary another album and another chance, because I think it would have been part 3 to that band. And it would have been, could it have been as big as, with Dave or with Sammy? Nobody really knows. I wish they would have given it a little bit more of a chance, because there was something that was untapped, and live they were showing no diversity to the old category, the old catalog, because they were pulling old stuff out from Dave's era, and then they were pulling stuff out from Sammy's era. So he had really big shoes to fill, being, the frontman to Van Halen. Was he going to get scrutinized and criticized? 1,000%. But live, I thought Gary pulled it off, and he did a good job.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing with Gary, as far as that album was concerned, if you think about that time period, that was kind of the start of what I call the decline of rock in the country. 98 was like, we're past even the Sammy Hagar type Van Halen at that point, because like music was completely changed. And I don't know. I think that was the issue. Another issue with that album was the time period it was released. I mean, rock was kind of on the decline.
It didn't help that Eddie was going through his problems too at the time.
Yeah.
Right.
That was like the start of his major downfall.
I got to ask Bill, and then I'm going to ask each of Michael, Joby, and Buddy, and then I'm going to ask Bill first. Top 3 Van Halen songs.
Oof.
Doesn't matter what era.
Wow.
Unchained, Jump, and Panama.
There goes Buddy. Michael, what do you think?
Oh my gosh, I'm the one. Hot for Teacher.
Oh.
And Unchained. Yeah, Unchained is a good one, man.
Jody? Joe B, not Jody, sorry.
That's right. Wow. Cake one. Like, I see.
Joby needs a set list.
I mean, it's kind of hard to think, because for me, I love all of it too. But what set the Sammy era for me was Pound Cake.
Oh yeah, that's killer.
It was just such a driving song. It was like, wow, they came out with this. My other like kind of like dirty little secret would be Dirty Movies. And then Simple Rhyme.
Oh, good one, Joe.
Harmonies and everything. It was a staple for me.
What do you think, Bill?
I really can't say what my favorites are. What I can tell you is what I have fun playing best live. And obviously Panama is awesome. Best of Both Worlds was the song that kind of like introduced me to the whole. That was probably Half a Teacher, Panama, and then Best of Both Worlds were the first like 3 songs that I heard. Because remember, I found out about Van Halen in like '87. I was very young. I was only 10 years old at that time. And then Romeo's Delight is another one that I love. But I can't sit here and tell you what my favorites are. It just There's just too many, man. I can't.
I know, right? It's too hard.
Yeah, it's really hard.
What do you think, Bill?
You know, for me, I mean, there are so many great songs from both eras of the band, but the three that stand out for me, as far as that my mouth just fell to the floor when I heard them the first time. You Really Got Me, I mentioned earlier. Unchained and Little Guitars is the third one.
Another good one.
Yeah.
Now, you guys got to forgive me on my top three because I was in high school when Sammy was in the band. And Finish What You Started was always one of my favorites. Like, I don't know why. It was just always one of my favorite jams. Eruption is another big one in my book.
Yeah.
And I got to go with Jump. Just because being a child of the 80s, man, you couldn't go anywhere without hearing that song.
Still, to this day.
Yeah, still.
I'm at Home Depot 2 nights ago. They're playing it through the whole place. I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy.
Somebody, one of our Facebook users, unfucking chain, simple rhyme, and dance the night away.
There you go.
You really could
And
just
harken
you could
back
just
a
see.
little bit to the previous. I also agree with the panelist comment that Sammy Hagar tried too hard to be cool as Diamond Dave. Just tried too hard to be cool. It didn't cut it for me. Red Rocker was good on a couple songs on his solo stuff. Three Lock Box was good. I totally agree with only one thing Sammy said, and it's impossible for me to. I can't drive 55. Man, I gotta say, as far as Bill, and you would be the only panelist that we have that is on both sides, playing the Eddie part. What do you have more fun playing?
It's all awesome to me, man. It really is. I love playing. You know, when we do touch some of the David Lee Roth stuff. Usually we play the songs that Sammy sang back when he was a part of the band because we kind of stay true to the Van Hagar side of everything. And but you know, I learned it all, man. I love playing it all. I really do, man. There's I don't know, as a guitar player, when I look at it as a guitar player and I look at all the parts, it's you see that the same guy wrote all this stuff.
Yeah.
From 78 to the last album. It's it's all Eddie. So you know what he's doing and that's got to be it for me. That's why I love doing it. You know, he's my favorite. I love playing his stuff and it's all of it. It's
Can
all
you
awesome.
play with a cake mixer?
Huh?
Can you play with a cake mixer?
A cake mixer, yeah.
Like
That's
you're
the
getting a
thing,
pound cake.
it didn't matter who was singing for the band in a way because, like Bill's saying, he's an Eddie fan, and he is the guy, he is the glue, he's the foundation, he's the backbone of Van Halen. So in a way, of course, Roth brought the beginning, and and Sammy carried the torch, and it didn't matter who it was in a way because Eddie was the consistent. Eddie was the writer, he was one of the primary writer. I mean, all those guitar riffs that, had never been put together like that before, changing guitar. And, it's really Eddie, it really comes down to Eddie, I think,
I agree with you, dude.
Yeah.
Consistency of, Eddie playing guitar and, having a rhythm section behind him that turned, goat piss into gasoline, every night.
Little duck gun there.
You gotta love the Blues Brothers. I'm sorry.
Now, one last thing I want to do is I want to give our viewers a little bit of info on your bands so that they can check you out. So guys, go out and support these guys and see both sides of the Van Halen coin. I'm going to start first with Bill in Van Hagar. How long you guys been together and where can people check you out at?
We're together now about 6.5, 7 years almost. We play all over the place. We're based out of Long Island, New York, but we just like I said, we play all over. We have a gig down. We just played the Landis Theater in Jersey, Saturday.
Did
2 weeks. What?
Which I saw, came down and saw you guys.
Yes. Thank you for that, and thanks for trying to fix my guitar.
Yeah, no, man.
Then we're playing in Pittsburgh. We're all over the place. Texas, we're all over, and yeah, you're gonna get a good show with all the Sammy Hagar hits and a couple of the old school stuff.
Very cool.
Yeah,
I
very-
saw you guys. I thought you guys were great.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you guys are
Thank
great.
you, buddy.
Yeah.
I've
very
seen
I'm
I've
gonna
seen a lot of
play
your
on
videos
to
too. You guys are awesome as well.
The
man.
front man for Romeo's Delight to introduce his band. This is Buddy Blanche.
Hey, Romeo Delay. We have so much fun playing all this stuff, and we have a lot of shows coming up this year. We're playing the Riviera Theater in April, by Niagara Falls on our side. And, we're also playing Daryl's house. Daryl's got this killer venue up in Pauling, New York, which we've been lucky enough to play there for the last couple of years and sell it out. And that is so much fun playing up there. Top-notch place. And we play Havana and New Hope. We got a show there in May, which is going to be excellent. We also play the Mock Chunk Opera House. It's a beautiful theater right in the center of Jim Thorpe, PA. And we got a lot more coming up too. So we're just having fun doing it. And actually, this March will be 15 years, baby.
Wow.
15 years. It's
Now,
Congratulations.
website, social media for you guys?
yeah, we're if you define us, our website is VanHalenTributeBand.com.
There it is. Can't get
Easy.
easier.
Yeah.
And Bill, social for you guys?
Van Hagar, New York. VanHagar.com or VanHagar.net.
Nice.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much.
Thank you,
for
CT.
being here tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having
And
us.
like I said, guys, make sure you get out and check out these guys. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great rest of your night.
Woo, thank you.
Hey, Bill. Go, man.
So there was the first Rock Debate Club, guys. I want to thank all those guys for coming on. Bill, I just shut you out for a second by accident. Wanted to say great. I think this was a great start to a new series.
Absolutely.
And a lot more good conversations going to happen. Really looking forward to seeing where we go with this. Next month, for the month of February, we're picking a fight that I want to pick that's been brewing for a while, which is a Metallica versus Megadeth camps.
Oh boy.
And I think we're going to hear a lot from the heads that were, Black Album and before. We're going to talk about it all. And Bill, any debates that you precede that would be good to possibly offer these guys?
Well, the obvious one that I can think of is AC/DC, Bond versus Brian.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a real good one. And I think, another thing that people have been getting on me for, and I'd be remiss to not mention it during a Van Halen show, is people have been clamoring for me to do best guitar players. And I don't want to say I want to do that as a debate, but more of a roundtable type discussion, just because music's subjective. Everybody likes what they like, but as far as skill, it's something completely different.
Well, there's so many different types of styles and players to choose from when it comes to guitar players, though. I mean, I think some years ago, Rolling Stone tried to pick the best guitar player of all time, and they came up with a list of 64 players going back to the 1950s, people like Link Wray and Wes Montgomery, and bringing it up to the 90s era. And it was almost impossible to compare apples to apples with this, because the manner in which the instrument had matured over the course of the 40, 50 years that they were looking at was just so monumental.
I mean, some of the strides that just Les Paul made by himself were amazing. I mean, the guy pretty much rocked until his dying day.
Well, absolutely. But the other thing about it too, with guitar players, is there are some people who are so stellar at a particular style that they almost are synonymous with the style. I mean, with blues, people almost certainly think in terms of, yeah, people like Eric Clapton or Peter Green, for example. For Southern rock, country rock, Duane Allman almost stands alone, even
Oh,
today.
yeah. Oh yeah. And I mean, there's the list goes on and on and on. I think kind of what I proceed us doing in the next 2 weeks, or I mean next 2 months, because this is going to be a monthly segmented show. I see us doing Metallica Megadeth next, and then after that, I'd like to do the AC/DC Bomb versus Brian. I think that would be a great topic. There's just so much involved in that, and almost like the Van Halen thing, you'd be remiss between Brian Johnson and Bon Scott if you didn't mention Axl Rose.
Oh boy.
Axl would be the Gary Sherrod of. But yeah, dude.
Well, fair is fair. I mean, there was a part of me when I heard that Axl was doing that. After I got over the initial shock, I said to myself, he's always loved AC/DC.
Yeah.
Guns N' Roses covered Whole Lot of Rosie going back to the club days. In a way, it made sense.
I think
don't know if
Axl
people
did a
liked it.
great job. I think he did a great job, and he came out from like the shadows he had been hanging in for a couple years, and he got very business-like very quick. He wasn't missing any show times. He wasn't doing any of the old Axl stuff. And when he got on tour back with like Duff and Slash, was the same period that he was doing the AC/DC thing too. And I think he took both jobs seriously and brought his career back.
Well, working with Angus and Malcolm, Axl had no choice but to clean up his act from a professional point of view. They weren't going to take that from him. I'm sure they made that clear from the get-go.
Somebody is telling us to bring on Rat Rod for panelists for AC/DC. I definitely think we're going to. Good friends of ours, and I see that happening. But Bill, as always, man, a pleasure. Thank you for being here with us.
Oh, same here, CT. We'll look forward to talking with you in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good, Bill. Talk to you soon.
Take care.
Guys, have a great rest of your night, and check us out next month.